Ex-Michigan quarterback coach and co-offensive coordinator for a year, Matt Weiss has allegedly hacked thousands of student athletes' accounts for a variety of pictures, videos, intimate things that have been out there. And this news just broke on Thursday, the first day of March Madness, the NCAA tournament really getting going and everything like that. This is obviously incredibly sad news for the victims of what went on in this scenario. There are obviously people that are being deeply affected by this. If you've read up on this, there are a number of people who believe that they were hacked by Matt Weiss and what he did in their situations, and there's obvious remorse and stuff going on in their lives. So we're going to cover this and talk about if this is possibly connected to the Connor Stallions cheating scandal with the sign stealing and stuff like that, because that does seem to be a question that is out there right now. Many Michigan State and Ohio State fans seem to believe that is the case. Many Michigan fans are saying, no way, you're crazy. So we're going to look at it from probably about three different angles and see, is this connected at all? Can this be placed in that scenario? And I'm going to bring up the stuff. But before we do that, I do want to say, like, this to me is not some kind of rivalry banter and stuff like that, right? Like somebody like Connor Stallions doing something and Ohio State fans, labeling it as cheating and stuff like that. Har har, that is rivalry banter. That's two teams going against each other. This is a situation where we are going to dig deeper into it for some college football aspects. But first and foremost, we need to recognize that this is a very sad situation, that Matt Weiss is obviously an individual who cannot be trusted. He is an individual who has invaded the private lives of so many different people, and what he has done to them is incredibly sad, and we need to mourn for the victims of this. However, there is the football portion of this that fans do want to look into as well. So we're going to look into that, but also we are not going to forget the victims of this situation and, obviously mourn and feel bad for those. And if you know that anybody that's affected by this situation, please offer your thoughts, your prayers, your support any way you possibly can. They may not want to talk about it. They may not want that, but offer up whatever you can. All right, let's take a look at this situation. So the first thing here is this is being reported not widely by everybody, but by some Detroit, Michigan type of media, that this was something that was primarily done to female student athletes, which if that's the case, okay, there could be some men in a scenario here, but if it's done to primarily females, this would not be a situation where this could affect college athletes. The Ohio State fans believe that this could affect them because Matt Weiss could have been logging into cloud drives, email, stuff like that, that players would have received communication from other coaches. Maybe they would be receiving game film. Maybe they would be receiving practice film. And so the thought by some Ohio State fans is, if they can log into our starting quarterback's, Google Drive, does he have practice tape from that Google Drive of him? Does he have practice tape of the running back? Does the linebacker have practice tape of him and the cornerback, right? So the thought here is that, and then obviously there was the thought as well from Nick Saban when Alabama faced Michigan in 2023. Nick Saban did not allow his players to use their iPads in the cloud database to view film and to view practice film. He wanted them to have a different I forget exactly what that avenue was, but there was a situation with that. So clearly this is something that is not completely out of the realm of possibility, right? There is a possibility here that this could happen, but if this was done to primarily females, obviously the intention of Matt Weiss was obviously not primarily for spying on athletes and getting their game film, but it was a much more perverted sense of looking at somebody's intimate photos and pictures. And we all know what somebody would probably do with those things once they find them. So I think the first thing we have to do is look at, is this true? Is it true that Matt Weiss was primarily looking up women, female content for maybe his own use, maybe the use of others, maybe selling it, stuff like that? Well, there's a number of articles, like I said, that speak about this. And this one in particular, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so that way you can see it with me. It's going to pop up and be weird for a second. There we go. That's much better. So this one comes from the Detroit Free Press, and it says feds indicate ex-Michigan football coach Matt Weiss he hacked computers to spy on women. Now, if this was the case, then this would make a whole lot of sense. I apologize for the ads here. There's really no way I get rid of them. I'll close them out as I can. So we see they are quoting the indictment here, saying Weiss primarily targeted female college athletes. Oh, okay. Well, if this is in the indictment, he researched and targeted these women based on their school affiliation, athletic history, and characteristics. Some other places would say their physical characteristics, stuff like that. But here they quote just characteristics. Now, this is obviously an issue because they are starting to quote some different things, some different wording. And when I started reading these quotes that looked similar but were not exactly the same, I said, okay, I need to go to the actual source and find out what does the indictment say. Well, when we look at the indictment here, we see this is the full indictment. Again, an indictment is just an allegation. This is not a full-on charge. This is not him, being fully against it right now, right? Like, well, it could be a charge, but you know what I'm saying? Like, this is just an allegation right now. But still, this is something that obviously they feel like they have enough with. We can follow this up further. But when you look in here, you say, okay, well, where does it talk about women? Where does it talk about females? Well, easiest thing to do is just control find or command find. There we go. And look at that. I already have it pulled up. Women. It says there is no use of the word women in here. Well, okay. Well, maybe we look up female. In the indictment, it does not mention female or women at all. So if this was primarily done to women and that was in the indictment, that would make sense and that would clear it as something that was probably not used against Ohio State. But since we are not clearing it, this is just talking about athletes in general. See data of more than 150,000 athletes, more than 2,000 targeted athletes. Again, that's where it kind of talks about the target, the 1,300 additional students and or alumni from universities across the country. I'm failing to see where we're seeing statements like this at. And I've even reached out looking for people who have been reporting this stuff to try and tell me where it's at. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying I can't find where these quotes are coming from. And if these quotes are not correct, or maybe there is some wrong wording, or maybe it's just sourcing and it's not actually in any indictment, I can't take these as completely true that this was only women or this was primarily women. So if you look at it from that standpoint, that kind of leaves an open door a little bit that maybe this was more than just women. Obviously, you read other articles, there are people who believe that they were hacked by Matt Weiss, and those people seem to be women, so it would make sense that there were women involved in this, but it doesn't list that exactly in the indictment or in the criminal complaint, at least not from what I've seen. If you've seen differently, please comment and let me know. Or if you know somebody who has written one of these articles, please get me in contact with them. The two here are Teresa Baldus and Tony Garcia. Again, not challenging them and saying they're doing a bad job. I don't see where the quotes are coming from, and I would like to see that. So if we don't see any mention of women or females in the indictment, that leads us to believe, okay, maybe something else, right? Maybe there was more information here. The next place we need to go is if he was doing this before Michigan, does that change things, right? It says that Matt Weiss started doing this in 2015. It ended in January of 2023. I believe that was when he was fired from Michigan. He coached in 2021 as the QB coach, was the co-offensive coordinator in 2022, and he was fired in 2023, January of 2023. So we look at his situation here. There are some people pointing out that Matt Weiss started doing this when he was with the Ravens. He started with the Ravens back in 2009. As far as I'm concerned, if this was something that he was only doing for the Ravens, only John Harbaugh was having him do it, he would have started at some point before 2015. Now, maybe he didn't have the capabilities or anything like that. I suppose that could make sense, but this was not something he started until 2015. So if we look at this and we say, okay, maybe he was using this to his advantage at Baltimore, right? Maybe Baltimore was doing much better based on him and his abilities there. Well, Baltimore, if you know anything about them, they were not particularly good. It doesn't have the records here, but they were not particularly good in 2015, 16, 17. I think they won 10 games maybe once or twice in 18 and 19, but they were not particularly good from 15 through 17. So those seasons wouldn't have made sense for him to do it. And honestly, it wouldn't have made much sense for him to start cheating for Michigan or anything back then, especially if they aren't doing well. So he gets to Michigan in 2021. It's possible he was already doing this. Maybe somebody realized he was doing it, tried to leverage it in some type of way. Maybe Matt Weiss realizes, oh, I can use this to hack students, and maybe not just women, but also student athletes of football teams and get their practice footage. I suppose that's a possibility, but it seems to be a reach to me, and it seems to not be founded in any facts. Or I mean, there is reasoning there possibly, but there's nothing really connecting that makes it a solid allegation. I think it's safe to say it's a possibility, right? It could happen, but this is not something that I would, pound my chest for and say this absolutely happened. He logged into these players and did this, just based off the history of him starting in 2015. Now the question could be, how did he start in 2015? If he didn't have access to colleges and stuff like that, that's certainly a question that could arise. But for the most part, this doesn't seem to be something that would link it from when he started until when he ended. And then obviously, like I was talking about with the reasoning there, this would have been something that somebody could have, I guess, realized, but it seems a bit far fetched just because there's nothing really linking it together. The other thing is the lack of institutional control. And this is what people have been kind of harping on Harbaugh for. Lack of institutional control would go to Harbaugh, could possibly go to Ward Manuel, I believe, as well. I'll get to my conclusion here in a moment, and that's when I'll mention Ward Manuel. But as far as lack of institutional control, I mean, here's the definition right up here. We have a little bit here to talk about, but the definition: institutional control refers to the efforts institutions make to comply with NCAA legislation and to detect and investigate violations that do occur. NCAA member institutions are obligated to maintain appropriate levels of institutional control. Now, this is just talking about NCAA legislation and investigating the violations against the NCAA. What Matt Weiss did was not an NCAA violation. This was breaking the law and, snooping and hacking. This was not NCAA investigations. Now, if you could find out that he had spring practice footage of a player, or maybe practice footage or whatever, sure. Maybe, yeah, you could say that. But as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing here that is talking about lack of institutional control that has to do with somebody in your institution that broke laws. This is talking much more about the NCAA and their rules. I mean, even when you look at it here, what does it mean when an institution is found to have lack of institutional control? Adequate compliance measures with the NCAA, appropriate education on those compliance measures. Educating your people on making sure they do comply with the measures of the NCAA. Sufficient monitoring to ensure the compliance measures are followed. I mean, everything here is compliance measures because everything here is about following the NCAA. To me, this seems to be an isolated incident. Is there a possibility that's not an isolated incident? Sure. It's a possibility, but there's nothing strong enough here to say this is in fact connected to Connor Stallions, and Matt Weiss was getting game film and spring tape from these players from their cloud storage, and he was implementing it so that they could have Ohio State game footage. Is it possible? Sure. Is there anything here that is directly linking those two things together? No. So I think in most scenarios, this is kind of like most scenarios, right? Michigan fans are not completely correct to say there is no way this had anything to do with Connor Stallions. Is it possible? Yes. Ohio State fans are not completely correct when they say, oh, he was obviously going after Ohio State players and stealing their practice footage and stealing their game film and doing that. No, I mean, it wasn't correct. Now, there is a possibility that he was getting more film, to possibly get signs. But again, these are things that are not proven. These are things that are not, we don't have substantial connections for. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it probable? There's nothing really showing that at this point. At the end of the day, what we need to conclude here is that there does need to be an investigation of the Michigan athletic program. And that's not so much because of Jim Harbaugh. Sure, Jim Harbaugh is playing a part in that, but that's because of Ward Manuel. When you look at the guys that have been hired in this football program, and there's been rumors of other programs having issues as well. But essentially, especially this football program, when you look at the guys who have been hired and the scandals and everything else that has been involved there, you have to seriously take into account what kind of athletic program is Ward Manuel running here. Is this an athletic program where he is just giving all power to his coaches and not doing any vetting, anything where he's figuring out? I mean, this wasn't like Matt Weiss got to Michigan and he just started hacking people. He was doing it for 6 years before he got to Michigan. 6 years. Now, obviously that was not known, but this is something, even if you're a Michigan fan, I'm not coming down on Michigan here. I'm saying if you're a Michigan fan, you should be praying, you should be hoping that Ward Manuel is investigated for what's going on in this program right now. Because even if this is not connected to Connor Stallions, it's still a black eye on the athletic program. It's still something that you don't want going on, and it's something you don't want being talked about, right? Your team's in the NCAA tournament right now. You don't want to be talking about this. You don't want to be worrying about this. Your team won a national championship 2 years ago. You don't want to be talking about this. You don't want to be worrying about this. But unfortunately, because of the way the program has been run, most likely by Ward Manuel and Jim Harbaugh, and I would say Jim Harbaugh's situation also, excuse me, is connected to Ward Manuel because he's the one in charge of it. I think it needs to be investigated. I'm not saying fire Ward Manuel. I'm not saying that it's all his fault. I'm just saying there needs to be some kind of investigation into how were all of these people hired. What happened? Were they given proper instruction and education on what they should or should not be doing? And I think if you're a Michigan fan, you should support that. Not to try and demean your program or anything, but because you don't want this stuff happening in your program. I wouldn't want this stuff happening in the program I'm a fan of. Nobody should want this kind of stuff happening in your program. And whatever you can do to make it stop, you should want it to stop. So that's the video. That's my conclusion for you. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Like, subscribe, and do all those things. I appreciate it. Have a good one.